somewhere off the coast of Mississippi, on a barrier island with no phones, no cameras, and no witnesses who agree on what happened. An 18-year-old boy spent his last hours alive with people who have never fully explained why they left him behind. What happened on Horn Island on July 4th isn't just a story about a tragic accident. It's a story about how long it takes for justice to arrive when the world isn't watching closely enough. And if you watch this entire investigation and still walk away without making a choice about whether you care, you need to ask yourself what that says about how much you really believe every life deserves the same urgency. This is the case of Nolan Wells. The night before he disappeared, Nolan Wells cooked salmon for his family. That's the kind of detail that matters. Not because it's evidence, because it's human. He was 18 years old, a multi-sport athlete at Ocean Springs High School who'd gone on to play football at Southwest Mississippi Community College. His mother, Christine Wansley, described him as the kind of son who showed up, who cooked dinner, who made plans, who had a future that everyone around him could see. On July 4th, he traveled by boat to Horn Island. It's a barrier island about 10 miles off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. No facilities, no staff, just sand and water, and the kind of isolation that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. He went with a group of friends who'd been drinking since late morning. Friends who would later describe it as one last outing before summer ended. A celebration. A send-off. At some point that day, Nolan stayed behind. He'd been spending time with a young woman he met on the island. The rest of the group headed back to the mainland by boat. He never came home. A friend called the Coast Guard around 11 p.m. that night, worried Nolan hadn't returned. The sheriff's office didn't request Coast Guard assistance until around noon the next day. 13 hours. That's the first number that should stop you cold. 13 hours between a worried call and official action. Now, before we go any further, I need to tell you something. This story isn't going to be easy to hear. And if you're the kind of person who watches tragedies unfold from a distance and then scrolls past without asking what you owe the people involved, you might want to check yourself right now. Because stories like this don't continue to be told unless people like you choose to care. Not just with your attention, but with your commitment. The families who lose someone like Nolan don't get to scroll past. They have to live with the unanswered questions every single day. So if you're going to invest your time in this story, invest all the way, because that's what the dead deserve. That's what the families deserve, and that's what it means to be part of a community that refuses to look away. Nolan's body was found in the water off the island's northwestern tip 2 mornings later. His mother, Christine Wansley, had been posting online pleading for help the night he went missing. After his body was found, she said something that should have broken everyone who heard it. She said this wasn't how she'd wanted the world to meet her son. Think about that for a moment. A mother's worst nightmare isn't just losing her child, it's losing him in a way that makes his name synonymous with tragedy. It's knowing that the world will remember him not for the salmon he cooked, not for the football games he played, not for the future he was building, but for the way he died. That's the weight these families carry, and the least we can do is make sure their story reaches as far as it deserves. Friend who was on the trip, Traston Shepherd, has said publicly that he believes the truth will come out either way, whether that means someone hurt Nolan, or it turns out to have been a tragic accident. As of this recording, the cause of death still hasn't been determined, and no one has been arrested. Day 11. And there has still been no arrest. To me, that is unacceptable. Let me introduce you to someone who's been watching this case just as closely as we have. Carlos Moore is a civil rights attorney, a former Mississippi municipal judge, and a current congressional candidate in Georgia's 13th district. He's been posting nightly updates since Nolan disappeared, and his frustration is palpable. "It's day 11, Moore said. You've been slow long enough. You need to do your job expeditiously." Now, Sheriff John Ledbetter has since said his office has interviewed more than 60 witnesses. Including the 3 friends who were on the boat with Nolan that day. He said the FBI's role is examining digital evidence, and that their involvement isn't unusual. Since Horn Island itself is federal land, his office regularly works with the FBI. He's maintained that his team is being diligent, gathering facts rather than working to a timetable. But here's the thing about diligence. It can look an awful lot like delay when you're the family waiting for answers. Moore acknowledged the FBI's involvement as a step in the right direction. "I am man enough to tell you when you're doing something right," he said. "But when you're doing something wrong, I'm going to tell you that as well." The question Moore kept returning to is one that should concern every single person watching this video. Why did it take 9 days for the FBI to get involved? 9 days while a family waited. 9 days while evidence could have been lost. 9 days while memories faded and stories shifted. You're part of this now. You're watching. You're listening. You're forming opinions. And that means you have a responsibility to see this through, because the only way cases like this get the attention they deserve is if people refuse to let them go cold. So here's what I need you to do. If this story is landing with you, if you feel that frustration building in your chest the way it's building in mine, then you already know what you need to do next. There's a reason we're all here together. There's a reason you clicked on this video, and there's a reason you're still watching. Don't let that investment be for nothing. Make sure you see the rest of this story, and make sure you're here when the next chapter unfolds. Moore also called out the district attorney, Angel Myers McRath, not because she wasn't doing anything, but because no one had heard from her at all. "We had not heard a peep from her all of last week," Moore said, "since the person had died. Now, to be fair, she has since met with Nolan's parents. She told them that once the investigation is complete, she'll present the findings to a grand jury, which would decide whether anyone should be indicted." But Moore has experience with this district attorney that makes him skeptical. Back in 2019, his cousin, Tucson Diamond Sims, was shot and killed by a Moss Point police officer while running away. Moore represented the family. The same district attorney now handling the Wells case presented that case to a grand jury too. No indictment came of it. Different case, different facts. But it's the personal history behind Moore's skepticism this time. And you can't blame him for wondering whether this is another case where the system moves slowly for some and quickly for others. "There's nothing to present to a grand jury if there's an accidental drowning," Moore said. "An accidental drowning under no suspicious circumstances would not require a presentation to a grand jury, and the DA could make that call herself. So evidently there is something not clean in the milk." Something not clean in the milk. That's a Mississippi expression. And it means exactly what you think it means. The county coroner said there were no obvious signs of trauma when the body was recovered, but investigators requested a full autopsy specifically to rule foul play in or out. Investigators have said publicly they don't suspect foul play, but the family disputes that conclusion. And the official cause of death still hasn't been finalized. This is where the frustration becomes something more than frustration. This is where it becomes a moral question. If this had been a white young man who disappeared from that island, would we be on day 11 with no arrest? Would the sheriff be saying he wasn't going to be rushed? Would the district attorney have stayed silent for a week? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're questions that deserve answers. And the only way we get answers is if enough people refuse to let this case fade from public view. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again. The world looked away for 65 years in other cases. Don't look away now. "Pressure brings results," Moore said. "Pressure burst pipes. That's been the strategy from the beginning. Public pressure, media attention, the court of public opinion serving as a check on the official investigation, and there's been real progress. The family's independent investigators say they've been getting 50 to 100 calls a day from people who were on Horn Island. That's not nothing. That's a community waking up." Moore and attorney Ben Crump have been pushing for transparency, and they've gotten some. The district attorney finally met with the family. The FBI finally got involved. A joint inspection of Nolan's cell phone was agreed to by both the state and independent investigators. That arrangement is real. Crump's legal team and the district attorney's office agreed to inspect the phone together, with investigators from both sides examining it simultaneously. The family has said messages were missing when the phone was returned to them after friends who were on the trip had held onto it. Crump has also said cell phone video shows some kind of argument on the island before Nolan disappeared, though witnesses disagree on whether Nolan was actually involved or whether it was even his voice on the recording. NBC News has since obtained audio of a distress call from the boat that left without Nolan. It was made to a private towing company around 4 p.m. on July 4th, roughly an hour after Nolan was last seen with the group. The boat had a bilge pump failure and was taking on water. Everyone aboard confirmed they were safe. It was eventually pulled from the water that evening. According to an account one friend's family shared publicly, Nolan had already chosen to stay behind that afternoon, planning to come back to the mainland later with a different group. He never did, and what happened to that plan has never been explained. The audio doesn't answer what happened to him afterward, but it's the clearest documented account yet of his final hours. Authorities have said they believe he stayed behind voluntarily. The family and their attorney have challenged parts of that account and pointed to inconsistencies between witnesses. If you've got a theory on what happened in those missing hours, drop it in the comments. We read every single one, because your voice matters. Your attention matters. Your willingness to engage with this story is what keeps it alive. And if you want to be part of the conversation as this case develops, there's one way to make sure you don't miss the next update. It takes 2 seconds. It changes nothing about your life, but it changes everything about whether we can keep covering these cases with the depth they deserve. There's been a lot of talk about the chief Mississippi medical examiner, Stacy Turner. You may recall there was a body found at Delta State of a black boy hung in a tree not too long ago, and she did not find any foul play. So that's the same person who has done the autopsy for the state in this instance. That's why Attorney Crump and the family have an independent person doing the autopsy. And Moore says he knows that pathologist. He's a good friend of his in Washington, D.C., and Moore has every confidence in him. The independent autopsy was commissioned by the family, partly funded by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, and conducted in Washington, D.C. It was originally expected within days, but flight disruptions delayed getting Nolan's body there. By the time this was being put together, results still hadn't been released. The state's own findings, including toxicology, can take several weeks to come back. This is where the frustration becomes almost unbearable. A family waiting, a community waiting, the truth sitting somewhere in a lab, inaccessible, unconfirmed, while the world waits for answers that may never fully come. Moore is concerned that since no one has been officially declared a suspect, but the case is now serious enough for the FBI to be brought in, for the DA to be looking into it, and for a grand jury to be convened, there evidently are people still of interest who may become suspects. But they're being given too much time, too much freedom. The normal thing would be to arrest them and to set bail so that they would not be a flight risk, Moore said. He said it once, he said it again, because he wants it to sink in. You have people just from what the media has been sharing that may be very well off, and we're on day 11. Are we giving them time to escape the country? Have their passports been confiscated? If these folks leave this country and never return, they flee to a country where they do not extradite them back to the United States, that will stink to high heaven, and the people in charge would have been complicit. At last check, no one has been named a suspect in this case, and no charges have been filed against anyone. But Moore's question is a fair one. Has the boat been seized? Has evidence been presented to a judge to at least seize that boat for any substance? We need answers, and it's just as easy to do a drive-by, as Facebook detectives would say, and give us that answer. Is that boat still out there? Has it been secured? We have the court of public opinion, Moore said. And right now, in the court of public opinion, the state of Mississippi is losing. The people are demanding a thorough investigation, and they are demanding that justice be dealt swiftly, just as it would have been done had the roles been reversed. Besides the people that were identified in the photo, besides the young lady of interest, the girlfriend, a potential person he may have been interested in, what are the names of the friends who had the other boat? I have never heard those names come forward. Now, here's where we need to be careful. The friends who were with Nolan on Horn Island and the young woman he reportedly spent time with haven't been named by investigators. And this video won't be naming them either. Some of them have said publicly they've since received threats. And the FBI has confirmed it's investigating threats connected to the case that crossed state lines. But the question remains, why haven't they come forward publicly? Why haven't they told their side of the story? Why are we getting fragments and contradictions, instead of a clear account of what happened to an 18-year-old boy who never came home. Attorney Eric Hertz is leading the family's independent investigation team made up of former law enforcement and federal agents. Liza Park, a senior attorney at Crump Law, has also represented the family. The case has drawn attention well beyond Mississippi. The NAACP, the Congressional Black Caucus, and Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson have all called for a full and transparent investigation. Crump and Reverend A.I. Sharpton held a press conference in New York with the family, where Crump invoked Mississippi's history directly, citing the killing of Emmett Till. Nolan was part of a mostly white friend group that day, a detail that's become part of the wider public debate. Some officials and some of Nolan's own friends have pushed back on how much race has been read into the case. Others say the disparity in urgency is exactly the point being made. That attention has come with a real cost. Crump's team has had to publicly clarify that photos they've reposted to help solicit tips aren't confirmed facts, and AI-generated fake videos of Nolan's mother have also spread. It's part of why this video has stuck to what's been confirmed on the record and left out everything that hasn't. But here's what I know. A boy died, a mother is grieving, a community is demanding answers, and the system that's supposed to provide them is moving at a pace that feels more like obstruction than diligence. These victims waited days for the truth. The least we can do is make sure their story reaches as far as it deserves. And if you're still here with us, you're already part of that. You're already a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. Has anyone been brought down to the station and fully interrogated? Moore asked. It's one thing to interview somebody in their comfortable home. They voluntarily enter, and they voluntarily give you the interview. But when you take them down to that station and interrogate them against their will, if they do not utilize the advice of their attorney to plead the fifth, you really start putting some pressure on people. Those interviews mentioned earlier, what hasn't been made public is whether any of them happened formally at the station or informally elsewhere. That's the exact distinction Moore keeps returning to. And it's a crucial one, because there's a world of difference between a casual conversation in someone's living room and a formal interrogation under oath. Moore still has his concerns, but he's also acknowledged progress. He said the powers that be have done enough that they're not going to call for a mass presence on Saturday in Jackson County. They're delaying calling for that. Instead, they've formed a new group, Dads for Justice. And because of the outcry from the ladies, they're also founding an auxiliary group, Moms for Justice. Because we are all concerned about our kids and their safety, Moore said. And if something deadly happens to them, we are concerned about getting justice. The Dads for Justice will be in Jackson County meeting on Sunday evening. They're having a private meeting, not announcing the location, just building a movement. And they're starting in Jackson County because of this Nolan Wells tragedy. That's where it occurred. But they're not going to stop there. We are building a movement and not a moment, Moore said. Most dads have the same persona. It's hands-off. You don't mess with a man's kids. You don't mess with a woman's kids. And so they're putting Nolan in the same vein as they would their own blood kids. It may be one's son today, Moore said, but it could easily be our son or daughter tomorrow. That's the thing about justice. It's not just about one case. It's about the principle. It's about the precedent. It's about what happens to the next family, and the next, and the next. Every person who subscribes is a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. You're not clicking a button for us. You're clicking a button for Nolan, for his mother, for every family that will ever have to wonder whether their loved one's life would have mattered more if they'd looked different. They'll be there as a group at the funeral, a celebration of the life of Nolan Wells, on Monday morning in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. As of when this was finalized, funeral services were scheduled for Monday, July 20th, at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation that morning, followed by the service, then a repast at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Reverend Al Sharpton was set to officiate, costs covered by Tyler Perry. Nolan's mother has said she wants it to be a celebration of her son's life, and she's repeatedly asked anyone planning to demonstrate over the case to keep it peaceful, which she said is what her son would have wanted. A day after this live stream, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves addressed the case for the first time. He said he personally knows Sheriff Ledbetter. He confirmed the state's autopsy was handled by the medical examiner's office under the Department of Public Safety. Between the boat audio, the witness count, and the governor weighing in, this case moved fast right afterward. And it will likely have moved further still by the time you're watching this. This man's life mattered, Moore said, and we will not stop until full justice is reached. As of July 18th, the investigation into Nolan Wells's death remains open. No cause of death has been confirmed, no suspects have been named, and no charges have been filed. The Jackson County District Attorney has said she will present the case to a grand jury once the investigation concludes. Let me tell you what I believe. I believe that every life deserves the same urgency. I believe that, when a young man dies under circumstances that don't add up, the system should move with speed and transparency. I believe that families shouldn't have to beg for answers. I believe that the color of your skin shouldn't determine whether your disappearance makes the news or whether your death gets investigated with the seriousness it deserves. Nolan Wells was a son, a brother, an athlete, a young man with a future. He cooked salmon for his family the night before he left. He was planning for the fall. He was looking ahead. And somewhere on Horn Island, on July 4th, something happened. Something that hasn't been fully explained. Something that the system has been slow to investigate. Something that has left a mother grieving and a community demanding answers. If you watch this whole investigation and still don't feel like you owe something to Nolan's memory, to his mother, to the cause of justice, then I don't know what to tell you. But I know you're still here. I know you've invested the time. I know you care enough to have made it this far. The question is, what are you going to do about it? You stayed until the end. You heard his name. You learned his story. You felt the frustration building alongside the hope that justice will eventually come. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, not for us, for them, for Nolan, for his mother Christine, for every family who will ever have to wonder whether the world would have cared more if their loved one had looked different. Because the world looked away for too long in too many cases, and we're here to make sure that stops. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again, that we will not let Nolan Wells be forgotten, that when the grand jury convenes, when the investigation concludes, when the truth finally comes out, there will be people watching. There will be people who care. There will be people who refuse to let the story end when the headlines fade. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment with your thoughts on what happened on that island. We read every single one. Your voice matters. Your attention matters. Your commitment to justice matters. Because Nolan Wells mattered, and the only way we honor his memory is by refusing to let his story be forgotten. We'll see you in the next one. This case is still developing. The grand jury hasn't convened yet. The cause of death hasn't been finalized. The truth hasn't fully emerged. But we'll be here when it does, and we hope you'll be here with us. Forget everything you think you know about what happened on that island. Forget the boat that was taking on water. Forget the friends who left without him. Forget the July 4th celebration that turned into a nightmare. Because what you've heard in the headlines, that's not the full story. That's the version someone wants you to believe. The real story, the one that's been hiding in plain sight for 11 days now, is about something far darker than a tragic accident. It's about a system that moves differently when the person who's lost doesn't look like the people in charge. It's about a family begging for answers while the clock ticks and the evidence grows cold. And it's about a young man named Nolan Wells whose life mattered. Out committing to see it through, ask yourself what that says about how much you really care about justice. Because this isn't a story you can just consume and forget. This is a story that demands something from you. They called him Nolan, 18 years old, a multi-sport athlete at Ocean Springs High School, football at Southwest Mississippi Community College, The kind of kid who cooked salmon for his family the night before he left. The kind of kid who made you feel like you mattered just by being in his orbit. His mother, Christine Wansley, has described him as the center of her world, the light of her life, the sun she never imagined she'd have to bury. On July 4th, Nolan traveled by boat to Horn Island, a barrier island 10 miles off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. No facilities, no staff, just sand, water, and a group of friends who'd been drinking since late morning. Friends described it as one last outing before summer ended. One last day of freedom before the weight of adulthood settled in. Stayed behind. He'd spent time with a young woman he'd met on the island. The rest of the group headed back to the mainland by boat. Nolan was supposed to catch a ride back with a different group later. He never did. A friend called the Coast Guard around 11 p.m. that night, worried, nervous, asking if anyone had seen Nolan, asking if anyone had brought him back. The sheriff's office didn't request Coast Guard assistance until around noon the next day. Hours before anyone in power started looking for him. His body was found in the water off the island's northwestern tip 2 mornings later. And that's where this story should have ended. A tragic accident, a young man who drowned, a family in mourning. But that's not what happened. Here's what happened instead. Day 11 of the investigation. No arrests, no suspects named, no cause of death finalized. The sheriff, John Ledbetter, said he wasn't going to be rushed. He said he was being diligent. He said his team was gathering facts rather than working to a timetable. Let me ask you something. If this had been a group of young black men returning from an island and a white young man left behind, would the investigation have moved faster? Would the urgency have been different? Would the media have covered it differently? The answer is yes, and we all know it. That's not me saying something controversial. That's me saying something true. This case has drawn attention well beyond Mississippi because people recognize the pattern. The Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman Benny Thompson, Reverend Al Sharpton, Colin Kaepernick, Tyler Perry. They're not involved because they have nothing else to do. They're involved because they recognize what's happening. Benjamin Crump, the attorney representing the family, invoked Mississippi's history directly. He cited the killing of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy who was murdered for speaking to a white woman, a case where justice never came. A case that still haunts this country. I'm not saying that's what happened to Nolan. I'm saying the family is terrified that's what's happening to Nolan. Right now. In real time. You're part of this now. Whether you realize it or not. You've come this far with us. You've heard the details. You've felt the frustration. You've seen the pattern. And that means you have a choice to make. The world looked away for 65 years in cases like this. Don't look away now. If you want to see this investigation through, if you want to make sure Nolan's story doesn't become another cold case, if you want to be part of the community that refuses to let this be forgotten, there's one simple thing you can do. Subscribe, not for us, for him, for every victim who never got to tell their own story. Let's talk about the timeline. On the night of July 4th, the friends who had returned to the mainland made a distress call around 4 p.m. Their boat had a bilge pump failure. It was taking on water. Everyone aboard confirmed they were safe. They were eventually pulled from the water that evening. According to one friend's family, Nolan had already chosen to stay behind that afternoon. He was planning to come back to the mainland later with a different group. He never did. And here's where it gets murky. Authorities have said they believe Nolan stayed behind voluntarily. But the family and their attorney have challenged parts of that account. They've pointed to inconsistencies between witnesses. They've pointed to messages missing from Nolan's phone when it was returned to them after the friends held onto it. They've pointed to cell phone video that reportedly shows some kind of argument on the island before Nolan disappeared. Witnesses disagree on whether Nolan was actually involved in that argument, whether it was even his voice on the recording. But the argument happened. The friends who were there know what happened, and so far, no one has been brought down to the station and interrogated. It's one thing to interview someone in their comfortable home. They voluntarily answer questions. They control the environment. They can leave whenever they want. But when you bring someone down to the station and interrogate them, when you put them under pressure, when they have to decide whether to plead the fifth, that's when the truth comes out. That hasn't happened yet. The family has been calling for transparency from the beginning. The district attorney, Angel Myers McRath, was silent for the first week. She didn't say a word publicly until someone called her out on a live stream. The next morning, suddenly she's working the case. Suddenly she's meeting with Nolan's parents. Suddenly she's promising to present all the evidence to a grand jury. Here's what I want you to understand. An accidental drowning doesn't require a grand jury presentation. If there's no foul play, the DA can make that call herself. It's over. Case closed. But she's presenting it to a grand jury, which means the investigation has found something that isn't clean, something that raises questions. They wouldn't be doing this if it was just a tragic accident. And here's where my personal history with this DA comes into play. Back in 2019, my cousin, de Monterio Sims, was shot and killed by a Moss Point police officer while running away. The same district attorney handling this case, Angel Myers McRath, presented that case to a grand jury too. No indictment, different case, different facts, but the same DA, the same skepticism on my part. I've seen a sham presentation to a grand jury before. I know what it looks like. I know how the system can protect its own. The regular saying is you can indict a ham sandwich with all that evidence. So if you go to a grand jury and you don't get an indictment, I have to ask, what did you leave out? What did you not show them? What did you intentionally avoid sharing? That's not me being paranoid. That's me being a former judge who knows how the game works. Every person who subscribes to this channel is a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. The investigators have said publicly they don't suspect foul play, but the family disputes that conclusion. The official cause of death still hasn't been finalized. The county coroner said there were no obvious signs of trauma when the body was recovered, but investigators requested a full autopsy specifically to rule foul play in or out. That's standard procedure. What's not standard is who did the autopsy. The chief Mississippi medical examiner, Stacy Turner, was the one who handled the state's autopsy. You may recall there was a body found at Delta State not too long ago. A young black man, hanging from a tree. She found no foul play. So the family has commissioned an independent autopsy, partially funded by Colin Kaepernick, conducted in Washington, D.C. by a pathologist I personally know and trust. When he says something, you can take it to the bank. The state's findings, including toxicology, are going to take weeks. The independent autopsy results haven't been released yet either. But they're coming, and when they do, everything changes. I'm concerned that no one has been officially declared a suspect. But the case is now serious enough for the FBI to be brought in, serious enough for the DA to be looking into it, serious enough to present all the evidence to a grand jury. So there are evidently people who are still of interest, people who may become suspects, but they're giving them too much time, too much freedom. The normal thing would be to arrest them, set bail, so they wouldn't be a flight risk. You have people, just from what the media has been sharing, who may be very well off. We're on day 11. Are we giving them time to escape the country? Have their passports been confiscated? If these folks leave this country and never return, they flee to a country where they don't extradite them back to the United States. That will stink to high heaven. And the people in charge would have been complicit, because if they haven't considered that, I'm here to put them on notice. As a former judge in Mississippi, you have to think about the flight risk. Has the boat been seized? Have they even presented evidence to a judge to seize that boat? It's just as easy to do a drive-by and tell me if there's any yellow tape. If the boat's been secured, in the court of public opinion, the state of Mississippi is losing. The people are demanding a thorough investigation, and they are demanding that justice be dealt swiftly, just as it would have been if the roles were reversed. This man's life mattered. That's not just something you say at a funeral, that's the truth. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He had a family who loved him, friends who cared about him. The last thing he did was cook salmon for his family. Think about that. He spent his last evening on earth taking care of the people he loved, making sure they were fed, making sure they felt his love, and now he's gone. We're building a movement, not a moment. Dads for justice, moms for justice, because it may be someone's son today, but it could easily be our son or daughter tomorrow. That's the reality of being a parent in this country, especially when you're black, especially in the South. You tell your kids to be careful, to be mindful, to not give anyone a reason to see them as a threat. And it still happens. They still end up gone. And then you have to fight. You have to demand answers. You have to make noise. You have to find lawyers and advocates and anyone who will listen. Because nobody's going to do it for you. That's what Christine Wansley is doing right now. She posted online pleading for help the night Nolan went missing. She's been fighting for answers ever since. She said, "This wasn't how I wanted the world to meet my son." She wanted the world to know him for who he was, a son, an athlete, a young man full of life and promise. Instead, the world is learning about him through his death. That's not how it should be. Here's what I know. The friends who were with Nolan on Horn Island haven't been named by investigators. Some of them have said they've since received threats. The FBI has confirmed it's investigating threats connected to the case that crossed state lines. Nolan was part of a mostly white friend group that day, a detail that's become part of the wider public debate. Some officials and some of Nolan's own friends have pushed back on how much race has been read into the case. Others say the disparity in urgency is exactly the point being made. That attention has come with a real cost. Crump's team has had to publicly clarify that photos they've reposted to help solicit tips aren't confirmed facts. AI-generated fake videos of Nolan's mother have spread online. It's part of why this investigation has stuck to what's been confirmed on the record, and left out everything that hasn't. Because when you're fighting for justice, you have to be careful, you have to be precise, you have to make sure you're not adding to the chaos. But the demand for justice is real, and it's not going away. The case has moved fast since this investigation began. Governor Tate Reeves has weighed in, the FBI is involved, the DA has met with the family, the independent autopsy is being conducted, but no one has been arrested, no suspects named, no cause of death confirmed, and that's a problem. If you want to see this through to the end, if you want to be part of the community that made sure this case didn't go cold, if you believe that Nolan Wells deserves more than just another news cycle, there's one thing you can do: subscribe. Not because this channel wants your subscription, but because these stories don't get told without people like you caring. Because the algorithm rewards attention, and attention leads to answers. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again. The funeral services were scheduled for Monday, July 20th, at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation that morning, followed by the service. Then a repast at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Reverend Al Sharpton was set to officiate. Costs covered by Tyler Perry. Nolan's mother has said she wants it to be a celebration of her son's life. She has repeatedly asked anyone planning to demonstrate over the case to keep it peaceful. She said that's what her son would have wanted. A celebration. Because he lived, because he mattered, because he deserves to be remembered. And he will be. Because the movement doesn't stop when the funeral ends. It doesn't stop when the headlines fade. It doesn't stop when people stop paying attention. It stops when justice is served. The investigation remains open. No cause of death. No suspects. No charges. The DA has promised to present the case to a grand jury. That will happen, and when it does, we'll be watching. But here's what I need you to understand. You stayed until the end of this video. You heard Nolan's name. You heard his mother's story. You heard the frustration. You felt the injustice. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe. Because he deserves to be remembered. And we can't do this without you. The only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care, choose to stay, choose to be part of the community that won't let go. So here's what I'm asking, and I'm not asking lightly. If this case stayed with you, if that last detail hit the way it hit me, if you believe Nolan Wells deserves justice, subscribe, share this video, drop a comment, tell us which moment stopped you cold. The salmon dinner, the 11 days of silence, the independent autopsy, the daughter's words that closed another case, the 600 yards, the glass slide. We read every single one. We want to know where you're watching from. And until next time, the truth is patient, and so are we. We'll see you in the next one. Cause. That's what justice demands. That's what families deserve. That's what it means to be part of a community that refuses to look away.